Thank you for joining us for our Learning Community Talk with Dr. Landon Mascareñaz from the Colorado Education Initiative. So today, Landon is going to share with us some details around the two projects that the Colorado Education Initiative is managing with us this summer. One under the ARPA Action Accelerator and the second under the MAA, the Measurement, Assessment, and Accountability Action Accelerator. In addition to outlining how they are approaching the project work, Landon's going to talk with us a little bit about how he plans to take advantage of the Seek Common Ground learning community. And he will wrap up his presentation with an introduction to the Open Systems Network, which he is the co-founder. After Landon's presentation, he and I will have a chat, and I will incorporate your questions. So please pose your questions in the Q&A function on Zoom. And this is also a pitch to join these talks going forward live so that you can have your questions answered by our speakers. We are recording, and we will record future sessions, so you'll be able to access them on Slack. And just as a note on upcoming talks, we have a few scheduled. We'll be talking with Delia Pompa on July 13th, again at 4 p.m. From the Migration Policy Institute. Again, she is one of the project operators around the measurement, assessment, and accountability work. We'll hear from Ian Rosenblum, Acting Deputy Secretary at the U.S. Department of Education. Actually, right after Delia on July 14th, so the next day, again at 4 p.m. And the other session that we currently have scheduled is with Pam Cantor, the founder of Turnaround for Children, and that'll be on 2 o'clock on July 22nd. We are continuing to schedule talks, and we're using the excellent responses that you've provided on Slack with Tom's Making Connections query. So keep giving us suggestions for talks, and we'll keep adding them to the agenda. In addition to these upcoming talks, we will be scheduling small group discussions with you. Again, thank you for noting with whom you'd like to be linked. And we're also looking for those understories to connect you with people within your Action Accelerator and across the other Action Accelerators as well. So all that's coming up. Check Slack tomorrow afternoon, as on Friday we'll be closed as we are observing Juneteenth this Friday. So I'm so pleased to kick off our summer talks with Dr. Mascareñaz. Landon and I first crossed paths when he led the Family and Community Engagement Office at the Denver Public Schools. And his work there really gave rise to Seek Common Ground's model. The work that we've been doing in supporting project activities across the country started with work that we supported that Landon was leading. So he's really our godfather in a lot of ways. And I like to think that he has helped set the values that we hold ourselves and aspire to. So I'm really excited for Landon to share his story with you and for us to have a chat a little later. So one more thing I should note, in addition to the many honors and accomplishments that Landon has, he's also the co-founder of the Open Systems Network. And in addition to the project work that the Colorado Education Initiative is taking on under the Seek Common Ground Action Accelerator model, we thought it would be a great thing to connect you all, if you are not already, with the Open Systems Network and have Landon tell you more about the power of really transforming education through this model. So you don't need to hear any more from me. I'm going to hand it over to Landon, and away we go.
Thank you, Michael. That is such a generous and thoughtful introduction, which is really, I think, just something I really just deeply feel and appreciate and receive, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you, you know, Sandy, Michael, Claudia, now Tom. You know, I remember being back at my time in Denver Public Schools, and you know, when you're working inside of a giant school system, it can often feel like you're really alone out there. And you know, working with you all was the first chance I got to share our work on a national stage, the work that was about supporting families, and where the idea of open systems really began to emerge from this notion that something was wrong with the way that our systems were designed, something was challenged with the way they were designed, and something was deeper than just the idea of family engagement. So I'm honored to be here with you all today. I have the privilege of being the Vice President for Community Partnership at the Colorado Education Initiative, which is one of the oldest intermediaries operating education across this country. We are based out of Denver, Colorado. I live in Denver, Colorado, where I grew up here, between here and California, and lived a lot, worked a lot in New Mexico, but it's really special to be doing this work in Colorado. At the Colorado Education Initiative, we believe in the 6 design commitments that we believe are critical for any sort of transformational redesign of education or public systems, really, but particularly our focus is on education. And you can see them here. Obviously, the family community partnership work is a key component of what we believe through, I think, a lot of what we get to, I'll share with you a little bit. The social-emotional development, we run a lot of social-emotional work, leadership, change management, diversity, equity, inclusion, youth activation. We believe that the intersection of all 6 of these design commitments is when you really see the flywheel start to spin in our American school systems. And I think that's actually really important to think about it from a conceptual level, because right now we have a lot of people running around talking about this, that, SCD, change management, diversity, equity, inclusion. But unfortunately, we have to hold all of these together and in orbit together. So to build that flywheel, let's move to the next slide, Claudia. A little bit about what we do, kind of from a project-based perspective. We have a bunch of projects working in currently over almost 50 districts across the state of Colorado. The project on the left is called Youth Connections, which is a socio-emotional redesign project. We're working in a set of districts across Colorado for the express purpose of helping them build out their socio-emotional ecosystem, which I can spend some time thinking through with you all if you're interested in talking more about it. That's happening both in the kind of urban part of Colorado in Sheridan School District, which is a micro school district, but also the very rural parts of the state. We also have a very exciting project that I get to be a part of, and we get to help and support schools and districts around the state on, called the Homegrown Talent Initiative. And the Homegrown Talent Initiative is explicitly a school redesign through community-driven lens, where we bring together business, workforce, civic leaders, families, and communities together to redesign education with a focus on pathways, career-connected continuum, and career-connected learning, with an explicit focus on rural communities in Colorado, which I think is a really neat component of building that theory of action. And then one of the other things I wanted to mention is that we do a significant amount of work helping school districts move to action around the issue of equity. I think in too many schools and districts around the country right now, there's a lot of perseveration. People are stuck in their consideration around how to move forward on equity. Whether it's in Boulder Valley or in rural New Mexico, or in a recent project we just wrapped up in Academy 20, which is in Colorado Springs, very, very, very different conservative contexts, or liberal context, or progressive context, or somewhere all over the place. We support schools and districts to build structures and systems to move them with a commitment to honoring all the people in their community, to build representative groups that then commit them to action to move forward, to break through some of the most pressing political problems in their district, which is, again, it's an honor to be a part of any of this work. And I'm excited to talk with you a little bit about the work that we get to participate alongside you all in the Accelerator. Let's go to the next slide. This is a model that we've built out for the ARPA Accelerator, and I'll share with you all on the measures work on the next slide. One of the things that I find to be really challenging about the way that we design projects in our modern era is that we think of it from a very linear sense. And I really think that a lot of the things that are the most cutting edge of leadership, research, bringing in biology into, connecting biology and leadership and connections and systems building, really talk about how we have to unwind that super linear sense of what's possible. So as we are approaching the ARPA project, we have to realize that there are kind of three categories of work that create building blocks for us to achieve what we're seeking with the ARPA work. So it's a highly dynamic process. And I imagine this resonates with many of you out there who are in the field. Many of you I see on the chat who are longtime friends and colleagues, people who I have deep and enormous respect for. I see Barry and Ingrid out there, and I'm sure there's others of you out there that I just want to say hey to. One is the social capital build out. Who are the people that we're working with? Who are the people who are our core customers or constituencies or partners that have access to social capital, whether it's formal or informal? How do we think about them involved in this process? What do they care about this process? How are they already engaged on this process? What are they interested in from this process to design and build out what this ARPA dollar in Colorado will have a chance to do? And then we have a set of condition setting. This is a set of things that we know are going to happen, but haven't happened yet, and actually could happen in multiple different pathways. That's how the advocacy groups are approaching readiness for ARPA in the state right now. There are state board decisions that are coming up soon in the next couple months about how dollars will be allocated. And then there's decisions happening at CDE around project management. They've been hiring for a chief strategic recovery officer. We know who our social capital constituencies are, but we know these condition setting dynamics will shift. Dynamic conditions will shift over the course of the project. And so this will allow us to adjust and calibrate the course of the project over the next couple months. And then really get into that energy calibration component. What will be based on the social capital structures who we talk to, and based on the political conditions that shift? How do we think about our final priority areas? What are the essential questions we're going to go into the field with, and what are going to be our clear advocacy targets? And then from there, we will emerge with a set of external engagement process that will allow us to shape the course of ARPA and also the kind of funding conversation across the state of Colorado. Let's go to the next one. This is for the measures work. Again, a similar kind of set of components here, but really also similarly with a different group, different questions though in different groups. First, that social capital build out. I know that Tom already dropped it in the chat, but one of the things that we've done over the course of the past year and a half, CEI does not take policy stances. We're not an advocacy organization. We really exist to support the field. We have a relationship with the State Department, but our primary focus is on districts, to get the districts to support innovation at the local level and field implementation that allows for all communities to thrive. I mean, one of those projects you can see in the blue here is supporting a project called the Local Accountability Systems Pilots. This was a project built with a waiver system that came out of the state legislature that we became the technical assistance provider for CDE, worked with about 26 districts around the state of Colorado to support them over the course of COVID, which was crazy. No one knew that was going to happen. You know, of course, that's how it all has been with all of your work, I'm sure, and all of our work. Folks got awarded right before the pandemic hit. And then during the pandemic, they actually got the money taken away from the project, but folks still went forward. There's such a hunger in our communities to redesign the accountability system. In so many ways, there has never really been a public conversation in our communities about the purpose, nature, design of the accountability system. And so the local accountability systems pilots has been a micro example of districts around the state and sometimes regional groupings taking on that question themselves. And so the link that Tom put on is really a great way to check out the final result of folks doing this work over the course over the course of the project. Got a chance to share out on that work. And so that's a really cool way to see that local districts taking this into their own hands have produced some really exciting stuff. We have a set of other partners, but we also have some questions in the condition setting. What's the advocacy commitment? What's the state board's commitment to this work? And what's CDE's commitment to this work? And that's all in a state of flux. And then from there, we're going to develop tools, finalize our partners, and build community targets that are going to allow us to roll out a set of assessment literacy indicators that are going to help us support families and communities around Colorado with understanding the context of what is the opportunity to rethink measures of success for schools and communities. So that's how we're thinking about these two projects. Obviously, enormous points of intersection between those two projects. We imagine that many of these partners will be in the Venn diagram overlap right in the middle. helping and supporting each other through the course of it. And I think that we just imagine over the next, in particular, 4 to 6 weeks, a lot of state board decisions, a lot of hiring decisions that are going to allow us to calibrate and set the conditions so that we actually are able to deploy it in a way that gets to the right action that we're seeking to build and seek common ground here in Colorado around the measures work and the ARPA work, because we know that's consequential for the future of our state. Let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to pivot to talking about open systems work. This is a quote from Margaret Wheatley, who is a leadership writer who I just really admire. If you haven't had a chance to read her book, Who Do We Choose to Be? I would say that it's a pandemic must read. You know, a lot of it's about how to sustain leadership in times of crisis. She wrote it way before the pandemic, but I think a lot of it found a lot of resonance. And in it, she talks about open systems, which was, I thought, very funny, because for many years I had been writing about open systems and talking about open systems, and to find it in a book felt really special to me. And so I lift up this quote a lot, because a lot of what the idea behind open systems emerged from was back in the 40s and 50s, in the post-war America, organizational theory and dynamics began to rapidly shift. The idea that organizations and systems were closed was the predominant idea of the time. That, essentially, you had IBM, and IBM was just an organization by itself. But in the post-war world, as cybernetics began to take off, and biology and the way that we started thinking about living organisms began to shift, more and more of the organizational analysis moved to this idea of an open system that actually exchanges energy and exchanges information with its outside external environment. And so from there, I've really been working over the past few years to bring that concept into education with a series of practices and beliefs that actually will allow us to, because fundamentally, one of the challenges I've often struggled with, people say, oh yeah, of course we got to engage families, of course we got to work with people in the community, but then they don't really do it because they're so afraid, they're scared, and they lack either the adaptive or technical skill to do it. So the Open System Institute that I founded with my friend and colleague Donnie Tran just earlier this year, and we're about to announce our first round of openers and residents who will help us design this emerging discipline. Essentially, the idea is that actually we know some things. We know some guiding principles, and we've co-created these guiding principles with a group of leaders that include some folks across the country. And I want to move to these guiding principles right now. So let's go to the next slide. Co-creation and co-production in all things. When we think about building with other people, when we think about producing with other people, that it has a ripple effect. When I worked on the Boulder Equity Council, we co-created a group that brought a recommendation forward for the Boulder Valley School District around school resource officers. That was just the beginning. Now they're using their Youth Equity Council to design what will take the place of school resource officers in that community. And when you build a muscle for co-creation and co-production in a community or in a school system that is atrophied from becoming closed off from its community for so long, it has a ripple effect, because now it becomes less scary, becomes actually more possible, more attainable, and we actually can think through the political strategy of what it means to deliver those co-creative results and co-productive results back into the system itself. Radical inclusion, which I'll speak to a little bit, which is, again, at the heart of the word radical is the root. What is the root of inclusion? We hear a lot about inclusion right now, but I think that fundamentally we misunderstand this concept in our task forces and committees we bring together, which I'll speak to in a minute. And a part of that is building, again, a kind of technique that we're sharing with folks all around the country to say, hey, try this out, tell us what you learned, and then we can iterate and adapt on it. Abundance partnerships. So much of closed system thinking rests on the idea of scarcity, and the idea that scarcity just permeates our minds, our hearts, and our spirits. When I was in Denver Public Schools, man, scarcity reigned rampant. And the fact that we were able to do certain things in our community and in our department rested on the idea that we brought different partners together with a shared sense of what was possible. To essentially put aside self-interest, but not take it away completely, but to put it aside is not the central focus, and move into this world of what does it mean to actually build abundance where all parties will grow, all groups can grow, and all communities can thrive and grow. And that has to be a key component, because only then will you get real information from all parts of from the external environment to move into the system. Liberation. I do a lot of equity work around in the field. I believe in equity work, but fundamentally I struggle with the term equity. I think it's a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I feel that the word liberation, and I think this was really resonant with a lot of the folks that we've co-created the open system work with over the past couple of years, liberation resonates more deeply. What are we really liberating ourselves from? We're liberating ourselves from the calcified, closed systems of the past that were created with the isms, racism, sexism, colonialism, paternalism, that were embedded by the founders who built those systems. And our role and responsibility is to, through redesign, liberate us into a new future where all folks can thrive, all people can thrive. That's hard work. That is the work of a generation. That is the work of multiple generations working in concert together for the potential of what is possible. But it is bigger than equity work. It is the idea of reimagining and redesigning. And fundamentally, none of that can happen without the work of open leaders, open leadership that believe in democratic-based change. People often say, well, this is really hard. It's hard to listen to everyone in my community. And when I hear school leaders tell me that, I go, man, it's so easy to build a through line from our inability to practice small d democracy at the school to January 6th. Our inability and our inability and our unwillingness to prioritize the small d democracy building work so parents are included in decision making at schools. The fact that we can't model that at the intersection where most people in our country work with public institutions, it's the most proximate contact they have, that we shouldn't be surprised that from a fractal change level that it spirals upward to our inability to practice democracy at the national level. So this is the concept of radical inclusion. I know I'm running out of a couple minutes left here, but one of the things I think with task forces, I often found this, we struggled with this in Denver Public Schools, is that we would do an application and then we would try to push everyone in the world through that application and then we try to figure it out on the back end. I ask schools and districts and community groups I work with to reject that approach to inclusion. I believe that there are 3 types of stakeholders in every process. Critical stakeholders, people who we know need to be involved. Interested stakeholders, people that will apply, and potential stakeholders, people who will never know about the process, but we have to get them involved. So when we worked with Academy District 20 in Colorado Springs, we said, who are the 10 people that need to be involved in this equity process that actually span diverse beliefs? You're just going to name those people onto the committee. We're going to have an application process. They got 400 applications. We're going to pick people for that. And then we're going to do a random sampling akin to a jury selection for the potential stakeholders. We're going to do a random sample and invite students and families and community members in and say, hey, we want your voice in this process. In my experience, it's actually been a powerful thing to just name those different types of stakeholders and move into a process versus to say, hey, we have an application, hey, you should apply, but we know we're going to accept that person, right? That's how 99% of processes work in schools and systems. My suggestion and our advocacy is to reject that notion. And Donnie's actually working on a project statewide in Kentucky to reimagine their accountability system that takes on radical inclusion at a statewide fractal level too, which is also really exciting. So more to talk about there, but I'd love just to move to the final couple slides. A reminder, one of the pioneers of open systems thinking was a guy named Stafford Beer, who was a real early pioneer in the field of cybernetics, which really fundamentally is, it sounds like it's a fancy word when we think about computers, but really is just the flow of information. And he is really obsessed about information. And I think we have to be obsessed about information in our schools and public systems. Who gets to know what? How do they know it? And how are we opening up the boundaries of our school system? Then, because we fundamentally, the reality is that if they're closed, it's a product of design. And we get to open that up. That can be our design. That can be our moment as a generation and as a collective group of educators and community members all over the country. So to the final slide, I just want to say, let us build an open future together. I believe that is our work, to choose an open future, not the closed future, not the walls, not the fortress, not the barricade, but to all work together collectively to lower the drawbridge and build a new open world that is possible for all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Landon. That was a great presentation. Inspiring. And I'm just looking at our chat. One of our colleagues from New York with the Alliance for Quality Education, Zakia, I will pose that question to Landon if your definition of liberation is publicly available.
Yep. So if you go to our website, I think Tom shared the link earlier. There are questions related to each of the open system principles. We really like questions versus answers because we think that context matters so much. So Zakia or Rachel, like you have to ask those questions in your context, and I'd be interested in your feedback and thoughts on that. So that's one of the things that we really value in the open systems work is co-creating with the people we're working
with. Let me start off our brief interview session with, I want to just cover your approach to our collective work and how you are planning to participate in the learning community, how you would like this work over the course of the summer to evolve and transpire.
Well, first, I would say, without a doubt, my experience in the previous world, before you were even called Seek Common Ground, and now as Seek Common Ground, I find that the folks that you all bring together, and I shared this with Rebecca and Samantha, who are Rebecca Holmes, our CEO, and Samantha Olson, our Vice President of Strategy, who are just like two of the most brilliant people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I said, you're going to love working with the folks that Seek Common Ground brings together, because I find over and over again that the folks that you all have brought together are people who are living at the intersection of politics and practice, and are thinking about what it means to build a better community. And they know so much. And so we're going to learn so much about how to approach this. So, I think the co-creation process and the co-production process has to begin with that, is a willingness to say, hey, we need help. We need help. Like our state needs help. Colorado needs help. What do we want ARPA to look like? What are you doing in Louisiana, Barry? What are you doing in Washington, Ingrid? How do we learn from each other? And so that's why we don't have a B, C, D plan for the accelerator, because fundamentally, we have to know who our social capital folks are. We have to know where the politics and conditions might shift. And we know eventually what our deliverable will generally look like. But one of the things we want to make sure that we do is build a condition set where the learning, again, an open system from all these partners, helps shape and build our learning over the course of the project. And so that allows us to, I think, create more flexibility and say, look, when CDE hires their chief of strategic recovery, that's going to change things a lot. We could build an amazing plan, a Cadillac. I could give you an amazing Excel file, Michael, and it would look great. But fundamentally, when that person shows up and say, hey, we want to do this or that, and then it's like, oh, we got to go back to the drawing board. So why don't we just embrace the ambiguity, but do it in a way that's strategic and focused?
I want to probe on that point that you raised, because going back to how you are organizing your project activities, right, how you're organizing that project work, if you could just unpack for us briefly sort of the theory of action around right, how you are approaching the projects, the building blocks that you presented to us.
Right. So I think, any good theory of action is if, then that. And I think that, I think we believe that if we can rally our kind of key social capital infrastructure components across Colorado, which is family groups, advocacy partners, our key constituents, our districts who have been involved with us in the pilots, for example, with the measures work. If then we can actually take advantage of the dynamic conditions that are emerging in Colorado, because that's a huge component, right? Like I'm sure you all feel this in your context too. Like, man, 24 hours is a million years. And we got a lot of change happening. We have legislative sessions pushing through a ton of policy shifts. So what we have to then do is say, how do we work with this group of folks, co-create with them, and then co-create alongside them the dynamic policy conditions that we want to. And some of that we're pushing on, and some of that we're saying, hey, we'd like CDE to do this. We'd like the state to do this, but we don't know what the result will be till a state board meeting. Then at the end, what will happen is Colorado will have the opportunity to really seize the moment from ARPA, which allows us to live in more of a real-time posture, I think, versus a kind of, here's our plan, and then we get to the end of it, and then we got to throw the plan out to get to the next stage.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to some questions that we've gotten. And so I'm going to turn to a question again from Zakia from Alliance for Quality Education. I don't know if you can see that in the chat, Landon. I'll just read it. How are you using your work to combat the attack on critical race theory, which is just smoke and mirrors to attack liberation?
Right. What an awesome question. And isn't this just like the topic of the moment, and a really important thing? And I really think in the spirit of seek common ground, I really want to like return to the root of what we're actually trying to get to here, which in my mind is helping schools and districts actually practice democracy again. And actually get to that spot, because they're so jammed up and afraid of their own shadow in many of these cases, because they're afraid of what you're talking about, Zakia, these smoke and mirrors attack, which are actually oftentimes like very inauthentic attacks on what's actually happening. So I believe that there are a few things that we got to do. One is we got to help them through radical inclusion, build a holding environment and a structure which will be politically resistant to any sort of pushback, right? So that's like number one. So that's where radical inclusion comes in. You build a great group of people in a task force, then process questions are off the table, which I'll come back to in a second. Number two is you have to get really clear about what your role as a facilitator is. In the processes I'm about, yes, in Boulder, we're talking about, we're talking about things in Academy 20 we're not talking about in Academy 20, right? But here's the deal, guys. We have to address people where they are in the hyper-local context which they're in and move them farther, not where we wish they would be, but where they are. This is about asking for help. If a district comes and says, hey, we need help, we're going right there where we're at, right there. We're helping them build the most resistant political environment that allows them to build a set of consensus-driven change. And I do mean consensus. We are practicing consensus and in a lot of these processes. And my recommendation is in almost every process, that's not a 50+1 process. It is you're getting to 90% agreement on the set of recommendations. I'm happy to share it around when it's available, but in the next couple of days, our equity report for Academy District 20 in Colorado Springs will be available online, Michael, and I'd be happy to share that. Yeah, so when we presented to the board of Academy 20 on the Equity Council recommendations, on the recommendations from the task force, yes, there were folks that came and pushed back on it, but we had 23 recommendations, and most of the recommendations were just really strong continuous improvement recommendations. I think it's really important that folks that care about liberation to understand the context they're working in and to radically adapt their methods and process to get them over the finish line to a set of recommendations that will actually be achievable. And I think so much of this practicing democracy in a local context is about building muscle to actually do it. To open a system up is about getting past the fear of the other, the fear of what lies beyond. And so if you can help districts do it in a way that is politically resistant and is also politically inclusive, man, you're really cooking with gas there. And then it becomes very challenging for people to push back on it. Then it becomes actually like, I just don't agree with that. Well, yeah, certainly there's all different things we don't agree on, but we have to remember, folks, that process and outcomes and the content are the most important things people have for criticality on any sort of process like this. So if we build a process right, then our ability to move it over the finish line becomes more challenging from a pushback or rollback from a reactionary level. The Academy 20 example, just give lots of pushback, but lots of encouragement, lots of people speaking their truth to the school board. And then at the very end, we actually had a member who was on the task force who spoke critically about some of the content, got back up in front of the school board at the end of the night and said, you know what, I might disagree with all of this, but I can't argue with the process. This was a good process. And I think that we have to aspire for that in our work. And that's a big part of the open system work and what we do at CEI is we help schools and districts build such a strong process that it resists the temptations on either side of the debate and actually builds that inclusive process to get to a really powerful spot at the end. Again, and this is the thing, Boulder's going to be redesigning. They got rid of school resource officers and they're redesigning them from a trauma-informed approach to be school safety advocates. That's not nothing. That's a significant step forward for liberation in that school system. And it really came through building a strong and resilient process.
Thank you for that, Landon. want to take another question, which I think is complementary to this discussion, is the closed system is actively working to disengage stakeholders, and there's also just so many countervailing forces. How do you practice radical inclusion when you've got such hard opposition to that?
Right. Man, I think this like, man, I appreciate that question, Michael. I think it runs through actually a set of questions here. You know, one of the things that I think is really important in radical inclusion is we have to, again, accept folks where they're at and say, okay, we're going to help you redesign how you've approached this whole process before. Like, when was the last time you did a task force? What time was the last time you did a council? How'd you do it? And we can't blame them or shame them for how they've done it before. We got to say, you're asking for help now, and we're here, and we're going to help. And now we're going to walk through every step of the process to build a radically inclusive structure. That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of trust. And that takes a lot of energy to move to that next level of structure and systems. But fundamentally, it can be done because I think that the challenge is, you know, and Margaret Wheatley talks about this in her book, Who Do We Choose to Be? She talks about building islands of sanity. You know, I want to work with the school districts, regardless of political contexts. And I've worked them in rural Colorado, large systems, suburban systems, political, progressive, who know they need help. And I think that's the fractal change. You know, to your point, Michael, systems are addicted to being closed, right? And the way that addiction gets broken from lots of research is when people are ready for help. And when people are ready for help, we don't show up and say, how dare you ask for help? We say, what do you need? How can I be there? What does it mean for us to work together to make it possible? And we have to embrace and accept the whole spectrum of opinions and work that's possible there. That's hard. That's really hard stuff. And in particular, as a person of color my family came to Colorado 100 years ago from Mexico, I hear stuff that is very tough. But I have watched people start getting those small wins that then snowball into big wins. And a lot of it is about helping them understand the power of co-creation and radical inclusion that eventually helps them understand the power lying on the other side.
I am so sorry that we cannot go on. This is just gold. Thank you for sharing this, Lynn. I do have a closing question for you, which will be a closing question for all of our speakers going forward. It's just, before I get to that, I just want to know, thank you for putting your questions in the Q&A function and also for posing them in the chat. We will get to them. We'll just have to do that offline. So I apologize on that front. But my closing question to you, Landon, is going in a different tack. Who's been someone who influenced you and why?
It's a great question, and I mean, there's so many folks, a lot of folks on this call. Michael, you, someone I really look up to. The person that came to my mind is my college mentor, Cyrus Partovi. He was the Undersecretary of State for the Shah of Iran and was a professor at Lewis and Clark when I was there. And they were always trying to get him out of the department because he didn't have a PhD. But he had more real life experience than the whole faculty put together. And he was someone who saw something in me at a stage where I wasn't willing to see it in myself, and when I wasn't trying hard enough, and asked me to try harder. And he taught me a lot about what that meant. And he used to always challenge me politically all the time too, which I appreciate, because I love a good repartee.
That you do, sir. That you do. And on that note, once again, thanks so much for joining us. We will see you all collectively for Delia Pampa's talk on July 13th. We'll be organizing small group discussions. If you would like to have a small group discussion with Landon, let us know. We can help facilitate that, and also continue to just make recommendations, make suggestions on Slack. We will do our best to accommodate them, and we'll see you on Slack. And have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.